When you think of the first characters that come from the franchise, you mainly think of Gordon and Edward, as they are some of the most important characters in the franchise, with character growth and impactful stories that have resonated with many Thomas fans to this day, like Edward's exploit and Gordon Goes Foreign. There is another character that, while not known, doesn't get as talked about as Gordon and Edward, and that engine is Henry, the Green Engine. Henry is a big green tender engine, who was also the third engine owned by the Northwestern Railway. When he came to the railway, he was seen as a pathetic engine, who would get sick all the time. But over time, and a few solutions to his sickness problem, has become one of the strongest engines on the island. You will mainly see him pulling goods trains on the main line and even the flying kipper at night, which is his own train to pull. But sometimes you will not only see him pulling the express every now and again, but also see him on a siding in his favorite place, the forest, where he basks in the peace of the place, showing that he is not as loud as Gordon or James, but could still be as rude as them.
Pah! You're late, and that smell is making me ill.
It's the fish, replied Thomas, and there's danger on the rails. That's why we're late.
Ha! You're the only danger on the rails, Thomas. Now stop wasting time and get your cars hitched to my train.
Henry was originally not the character I wanted to do for this next video, and was originally going to do another Steam Team character, but after the 80th anniversary, I decided to look more into Henry, and now I think it's the perfect time to talk about one of the first 3 characters ever introduced to this franchise, as he gets a bit overlooked nowadays, but that might change with the new Thomas and Friends show that is coming out later this year, but we shall see about that. For now, let's dive into Henry the Big Engine, starting with his journey in the books. Henry's backstory in the books is a lot more interesting compared to the other characters in the series, I would say, as there's a lot more in it than other characters. The story goes that an anonymous locomotive builder held a grudge against Sir Nigel Gresley, the designer for the A1s, aka Gordon's class of locomotive. He stuck into Doncaster Works to try and steal the plans for the A1 class, but instead he stole a rejected build, but by the time that they realized that he took the wrong plans, it was a little too late, as Henry was already built. The design had many flaws, with the most notable of them being an undersized firebox, which made Henry a shy steamer. Because of this, the thief was willing to try to sell off Henry to anyone who was willing to buy him. The Fat Controller was willing to buy a locomotive from the thief, and was told that he would be getting a Great Central Railway Robinson Atlantic, or a GCR Class 8B locomotive. But when Henry came to the railway in 1922, when the Fat Controller saw that was not Atlantic, he had some choice words.
I wanted an Atlantic, and that son of a bitch sent me that! What the fuck?
But given that the railway was facing a locomotive power crisis, he had no choice but to keep Henry, making him the third engine owned under the Northwestern Railway. That is basically how Henry came into being, and how he came under the ownership of the NWR, which is honestly really funny and sad, though this is somewhat rooted into the illustrations for Henry from when Wilbur first made them to when William Middleton, the first illustrator for the Railway series. Henry was drawn by Wilbur as an Atlantic 440, but when Middleton drew the illustrations for the first book, he made Henry a 462, which caused him to no longer draw illustrations for the Railway series after that. But somehow it gets worse, as the drawings for Henry kept on getting more inconsistent with each release of the book, with each illustrator, as Henry got a gold funnel top in the second book, but when the first 2 books were re-illustrated, Henry lost that gold funnel top, and in the first book's re-illustration, he was depicted at a 460. All of this leads to one thought in Audrey's mind, but we will get into that a little bit. But first, let's go over how Henry was introduced in the first few books. This first story Henry appears in is The Sad Story of Henry, in the first book of the series, The 3 Railway Engines. This is one of the most memorable and iconic stories in the series, but not for the reason that you think it is. In this story, Henry is afraid of getting his pay ruined in the rain, so he goes into a tunnel and decides to stay in there even after the rainy weather clears up. The passengers tried to push him out, pull him out, and they even tried to get an engine to get him out of the tunnel, but none of it worked, as he just stayed in the tunnel. As punishment, the Fat Controller decided to wall up the tunnel and have Henry stay in there, ending the story on a downer note, with Henry's paint being more ruined than if he didn't stay in the tunnel, and regretting doing what he did. Now, for as iconic as the story is, I do find the ending of it to be really unrealistic and silly, as the story is basically Henry stays in a tunnel and they break it up, which is not how this would work whatsoever. But like most fans of the franchise, I choose to give it a pass as it is the first book in the series. But this then leads into the final story of the book, where Gordon breaks down on his express run, which leads to the Fat Controller letting Henry free from the tunnel and help pull the express of Edward, which works well as an ending to the overall book. But I never really got the idea that Henry grew from this story, though that might be because of what happened after this book, which is that there was one thing that was added to Henry for the next few books, which is that he was constantly ill. Now, this wasn't all the time, since Henry would sometimes show up in stories like Thomas and the Guard, but most of the time he was in the shed being repaired or looked after, or was complaining about his illness. The reason why Henry was written like this for a while is because Wilbur Awdry despised Henry. He was annoyed at the illustrations for not being able to portray Henry as he wanted him to look, but instead look like another Gordon, especially in later books since he was blue and everything. So Awdry was writing Henry as ill so that he can set up his departure from the series. The plan was that Henry was so ill that he would be sent away to be fixed and would never be seen again. But something unexpected happened. Awdry started to get letters from kids asking him about Henry and if he will ever get better. Because of this, Awdry decided to write a book all about Henry, called Henry the Green Engine, which would lead to a status quo shift in the character and how the world will be perceived. The first story in the book is Cole, where after so many illnesses and repairs, the Fat Controller decides to ride in Henry to see what the problem is with him, which leads to the discovery that his small firebox is what's causing the problem, as the coal wouldn't burn properly in it, which leads to the Fat Controller bringing in a supply of Welsh coal, which burns faster than regular coal, which leads to Henry no longer having his steaming issues, and was given that fair chance that the Fat Controller gave him. But this isn't the status quo shift for Henry on the series, it's merely a setup to the next story that leads to the shift, which is one of the most iconic stories in the franchise, the Flying Kipper. In the story, Henry is set to take a fish train that is aptly named the Flying Kipper, but during his journey across the island, he gets set into a sighting at Kildane and crashes into a train, leaving him derailed and badly damaged. The next day, the Fat Controller reassured him that it wasn't his fault, but instead the ice and snow, and sets Henry to crew to be rebuilt in a better shape, so that they can no longer use Welsh coal. This leads to Henry coming back as a completely different engine and being better than ever. This is the status quo shift that I was mentioning. Henry was rebuilt in a new shape, as a new engine. He was rebuilt as a Stenier Black 5 tender engine, which is a real engine that existed in the UK. The reason of this is that since Henry wasn't going to work with how the illustrators made him, Awdry made sure that he had a real life engine that they can take notes from, which then led to every character in the books to be based off of a real engine, like Gordon being a prototype A1 engine, Thomas being an E2 tank engine, and Edward being a modified K2 class tender engine. If it wasn't for Henry's misinterpretation in the early illustrations and the kids that were sending letters to Awdry, we would never get this big status quo change that the books, and to some extent the show, would keep. All because of Henry. Now, in terms of Henry as a character, this is where I have to start going into my problem with Henry in the books, and it's that I don't think Henry really stood out that much. Aside from his illness and crash in the early years of the books, he was either a character that was part of something Gordon and James were up to, or was just another Gordon. He was part of the strike and Trouble in the Shed, he was against Duck and Duck Takes Charge, and the whole Duck and Diesel fiasco, and he was part of the deputation at the end of the twin engines. But most of the time, when we do get focus on him, it just shows us that he is very hot-headed or likes to trick others around him, similar to Gordon. He jokes to Peter Sam and the refreshment lady, he gets mad at being mistreated due to the events of Henry and the elephant, and he gets mad at Percy and Percy takes the plunge. Hell, he even teases Gordon when Gordon starts to become sad over knowing the fate of his brothers, which is probably the worst we have seen Henry in the books. Now, part of me wonders if this is all happening because of the fact that Henry was ridiculed and showed no sympathy before his rebuild. Back when he was still a faulty design, no one cared how he felt, as they would say he is faking it, or tell him off, or ignore him, because he was late. Hell, even a little bit after his rebuild, Gordon just straight up detested him, because he was capable of pulling the express, so maybe that is why he acts that way. Also the fact that most of the time that we see Henry, he is always with Gordon, a character who started so grumpy and pompous before he learned humility and grew as a character. There is also the fact that Henry is most likely self-conscious about himself. He gets mad at Percy because he is mucking about at the big sheds, he gets mad when he thinks Duck told the trucks to call him old square wheels, and he really wants another tender after seeing Flying Scotsman. So saying it like that, It does make a little more sense why Henry is always so grumpy, but it doesn't really justify the fact that he has done so many awful things that he did in Wilbur's books. That's not to say that Henry doesn't have some gleaming moments. I mentioned a deputation he took part in, but I also want to mention the story Super Rescue. In this story, Henry is sulking over the incident with the multiple tenders that he had in the previous story, and the fact that his regulator has jammed, saying that he was a failed engine. But when one of the two new diesels breaks down, Henry buffers up to him and starts to pull him towards his destination. But then the other diesel breaks down as well, as Henry and his crew decide right then and there to take the train to the next station, with a little help from the diesel pulling the passenger train. They're able to make it to the next station for Flight Scotsman to take the passenger train and for Donald to take the goods train. This alone would already make the story one of the most memorable, but I like the moment that happens after it a little bit more. Henry is taking the friendly diesel back to the sheds, and we see that the diesel looks up to Henry and is shocked when he learns that Henry was broken down when he was taking both trains, which makes the friendly diesel look at him in awe, which then leads to the ending of Enterprising Engines, where Henry brings in a good word for the diesel and he joins the railway under the name Bear. Super Rescue and the final story of the book really shows that Henry truly is one of the most capable engines on the railway, with how he manages to take two heavy trains to the next station and puts in a good word for someone who would soon call a friend. The engine that was constantly ill, would not work properly, is now the engine who could finish any job, no matter the condition he is in. Truly the swan song for Henry. After Wilbur ended his work on the series, Christopher took over writing the books. In terms of things that Henry did in these books, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about. Henry would show up every now and again, but never really changed. He did get one book to himself, which was Henry and the Express. In this book, it goes over Henry needing to go to the works for an overhaul. The first story is really cursed, just for the fact that we learned that the engines do have smoke box doors, but I don't want to curse y'all with that image, so just go watch the Unlucky Tug segment regarding that on his Thomas Debunked video. We see a classic Henry and James rivalry story, which I already talked about in my James video, but to put it as shortly in this video, they are considered second best to Gordon and are both obsessed with self-image, so that leads to them trying to one-up each other, which is a fun time to read all the time. Then we see a story about James trying to take the flying kipper, and then the final story of the book, where Henry is pulled out of the works early, still in his red undercoat due to an engine shortage, but despite the way he looks, he's still willing to take the train and finish the job, which is similar to how I described him in Super Rescue. But other than that book, Henry never really did much after that, as the series geared more towards Thomas and Gordon centered stories. Overall, I think Henry in the books, while still fun to read, suffered from a lack of identity. He had one for sure in the first few books with his illness and crash with the flying kipper, which did lead to the status quo of the Railway series, but after that, he really did just feel like another Gordon to me, without the character arc that made Gordon become one of the most important characters in the Railway series. While I wouldn't say he is as unimportant as James, I will say that he is the character of the main 8 that never really stood out to me. Let's move on to the model series. Henry, in the same vein as all the main characters in the show, was first introduced in the first season, as they play the events of his story pretty straightforwardly. The backstory is overall the same of Henry, just about the whole Gresley fiasco, which I don't really mind. Henry arrived on Sodor as a rather pathetic engine. He was unable to steam properly, and this hindered his performance. He first showed up as a background character in the first 2 episodes of the season, but we then got his first story, A Sad Story for Henry, where it plays out the same way, with them trying to get Henry out of the tunnel and then walling him up, which then became the poster child for how dark the show is and that he died in there or whatever. Then the next episode goes into him redeeming himself, and then what happens in Henry the Green Engine also happens, where he is given Welsh coal to make him work properly, and then gets into his flying kipper accident, which gets him rebuilt into a new shape. It's basically the same history. I will note that I think the accident itself was better done in the show than in the books, where in the books, the guard tells off Henry for making his drink cold, but in the show, there is no joke afterwards, and it is treated very seriously, which makes this one of the few perfect adaptations in the show, I would say. But overall, that was really it for Henry in Season 1. It was pretty straightforward. I overall feel the same with Season 2 with how they adapted Henry there. He is tied to the other big edges in those episodes, since that's what the stories did, and he was still basically a giant asshole similar to Gordon. With Henry, there really is a lot to talk about regarding him in the first 2 seasons, sort of in the same vein as James. Then we hit season 3, where the writers started to do new things with the characters that weren't really there in the books, since this was the first season that wasn't based on any Audrey material. I mentioned before that season 3 is my favorite season of the show for this reason, and the best example of this is Henry's own spotlight episode in this season, Henry's Forest, which is probably a contender for one of the best episodes of not only the season, but the whole show. While in the earlier seasons and somewhat in the season he was a grumpy asshole like in the books, Henry's Forest delves deeper into Henry in a way that makes him stand out from Gordon that was sorely missing in the books. In the episode, Henry loves to visit the forest whenever he gets the chance. It is peaceful and quiet, which Henry loves. But after a storm came through the island, the forest was devastated, which made Henry very sad. Now, back when this episode came out, the episode was criticized by Audrey.
Now, what interest does a steam locomotive have in scenery? Well, what responsible driver would stop as if he was in a roadside lay-by? You can't do it. They've shown a lamentable ignorance of Rule 55.
And while I do get it to some extent as it breaks some railway practices, which is part of the backbone of the appeal of Thomas, it being grounded in reality and the fact that Henry is Audrey's character. But I respectfully disagree with some of Audrey's criticisms with the episode. I said it already, but Henry in the books was basically another Gordon, which made it difficult for him to stand out. So having him be someone who enjoys his quiet time and tranquil atmosphere made him more distinct from all the other characters. But they also didn't neglect his bigger engine persona that the big engines are known for, as it was in season 3 with tender engines, but would come back again in seasons 4 and 5. In season 4, it was mainly him being boastful about how he wants to take the royal train, but then gets mad that he can't when white paint gets on his dome, which is pretty funny, though would have been better in season 1. But that's just a season 4 thing overall. There was also Henry and the Elephant, which was rewritten a bit for the show, since it was originally tied to the engine strike in the railway series. It ends with James and Gordon teasing him over it, which didn't really happen in the books, but I do like that Thomas tries to cheer Henry up at the end, which is tied to Thomas's character journey. With season 5, Henry got a few noteworthy appearances, and since this is season 5, Henry is pretty darn angry most of the time.
Owls, mists, ghosts. Edward's going soft at the boiler. There's no mist. Ha! You're the only danger on the rails, Thomas. Now stop wasting time and get your cars hitched to my train.
It seems like in almost every episode he is in, he is not really calm or relaxed like the Henry we saw in season 3. He is just someone who just hates everyone around him and needs to complain about something. Now, while I do find it entertaining since this is just a trait everyone in season 5 has, I do wish they did play more with Henry's softer side in some episodes, but I think that's just a me thing. Henry did not get any noteworthy appearances in season 6, but we did get one in season 7 with What's the Matter with Henry. In this episode, Henry's complaining that he is not feeling well, and Thomas and Percy tease him about it and pay him no mind. Now, while I do think that this episode has its problems, Henry was not one of these problems, as I found it understandable why Thomas and Percy would feel that way towards Henry, an engine who had no problems after its rebuild at Crew. But even though Henry is still weak from his illness, I like that despite the train he pulls, he still takes it on and pulls it a pretty good bit of the way there before he breaks down, which shows us the Henry from Super Rescue, an engine who will try and get the job done, no matter the condition he is in. After season 7, Hit Entertainment bought the franchise and soft rebooted it to target a younger audience, which led to new character descriptions, and the one for Henry is just not it, Chief. It reads, Henry is a warrior, an engine hypochondriac who has to burn special coal. He's a little vain, but through insecurity, not because he thinks he's the best. Identical to Gordon, but a lively shade of green, Henry pulls freight, not the express. He's one of the bigger engines / older children, but more modest and less prone to acting out than Gordon or James. He's also superstitious and is easily spooked. Unless given his own episode, it's easy to overlook Henry, as he's not as visible as James, Percy, Gordon, and Thomas. But Henry is nevertheless a key member of Tim and Shed's and should not be forgotten. We'll see about that. There are so many problems with this description of Henry. The first one is that he has a hypochondriac, which is just flat out not true whatsoever. Never before has Henry worried about anything in his life, and when he did, like in the case of Hunt and Henry, it was after seeing the mysterious things in his point of view happen in front of him. Before then, he just brushed it off as a tale Edward was telling him. There is also the fact that Henry needs to burn special coal, which is one of, if not the biggest retcon in the entire series, because he has not needed special coal since the beginning of the show, so having him need to take it this late into the show's life feels wrong. Also, they say he is vague because of his insecurity, which isn't how I would describe him, but more so James, as it makes the most sense given what he goes through in the model series. But my overall thoughts on Henry in the hit era is that he has the potential to lead in good episodes, and he has, but I feel as though that the Bible hinders him from greatness. Like, Henry and the Wishing Tree has the potential to be a good Henry episode that focuses more on his nature-loving side, but instead we have to deal with him not knowing how to pull the express, which is another dumb retcon.
But Henry puffed too quickly. "Go gently," called his driver. "You can bump freight, but you can't bump passengers." "Sorry," puffed Henry.
In season 11, we must deal with worried Henry because he couldn't climb up a hill, which is just the dumbest shit ever conceived. And in season 12, we get a sort of sequel episode with the Wishing Tree, but Henry legit thinks that they are going to destroy the tree when that is far from the truth, so it makes it so that he can't have them get to the tree whatsoever. And I hate season 12 so much, like, it's so bad, guys. Henry was at his best in both season 9 and season 10. In a spotlight episode in season 9, he is worried about the tree, but that is because of an incident that happened at the docks a previous day. He tries to find a way to save the tree, while still finishing the job of delivering the flagpole, which makes sense for the calmer Henry we know, and is the best tree hugger Henry episode of the era. Then we get 2 episodes of Henry in season 10, which also pair him up with Gordon, and I really like these 2 episodes. In the episode Big Strong Henry, Henry tries to prove to Gordon that he can be as strong as him, because Gordon chews him out at the beginning of the episode. And while Henry falters over pulling a long train, he comes out on top when the cows from Gordon's vans walk out on them, which shows that while Henry is not as strong as Gordon overall, he still has some attributes over him. Then we have It's Good to Be Gordon, where after Gordon takes Henry's special coal, Henry decides to just take regular coal, which leads him to start puffing black smoke from his funnel and wheezing, which leads to Gordon giving up his speed record attempt to help him out, which is something I really like about this duo. They have a rivalry, which has been there since the first season after Henry was rebuilt, but every now and again, they could put their differences aside and help each other or get the job done for them. While I don't like the whole special coal retcon, I do overall like this episode, and it's one of the better episodes of season 10. Henry overall in the model run of the show was a character that really came into his own. But we still had the more grumpy and jerk Henry that we are used to in the books. We also explored the other side of him that makes him tick, that he is really a soft engine who loves the forest and loves his peace and quiet, which made him stand out from Gordon, which was something that the books really needed. He had rage as a character as well, and he was fun with pretty much every character he was partnered with, like the sibling rivalry with Gordon and the banter he would get into with Thomas or James. He also had his moments where he was not perfect, but it never went as far as he was a pathetic character. And while the latter seasons really did him dirty thanks to the Bible, I will say that he was not as butchered in the hit era as much as some other characters. Henry may not have defined the franchise in the model series for a good reason, but it's no wonder we remember him mostly from this run of the show. The CGI series is going to be the most fun one to talk about because almost everyone knows what's wrong with Henry in this run of the show, but I'm still going to talk about it because it's how we do it around here. Unlike other characters like Thomas, Percy, and James, Henry has had the same actor in both the US and the UK. The US voice actor for Henry is Carrie Shale, who is well known in the Thomas fandom for the actor who plays so many characters like Gordon, Sir Topham Hatt, Kevin, and many other characters.
I'm chuffing! I'm puffing! I feel quite at my best!
In the UK, Henry was voiced by Keith Wickham, who, similar to Carrie Shale, is known to voice so many characters of the show. Keith Wickham's voice for Henry is not really my thing. He sounds like an old man, which may have been intentional, since this line exists in Henry's magic box.
Henry, you are an old and kind engine, but you worry too much.
But I never really vibed with his voice in the UK.
I'm sorry, hero, but I'm going to go back to the sheds until the good clean coal gets here.
In the US, however, I think there is potential with Carrie Shill, but it sounds a little too young to me, and it also doesn't help that his Henry scream is the worst between the two, and I will not be playing the Henry screaming clip yet. But if I had to choose the actor I prefer, I guess I would say the US, but only by a little bit. In the Nitrogen era of the show, Henry was there from the beginning, similar to all the other main characters, where he helps Hero bring him back to working order in Hero of the Rails. But after that, Henry barely did much of note in the Nitrogen era of the show. He got the occasional episode, but never had as much as someone like Gordon or Thomas. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a trend with these early Nitrogen episodes that would become more prevalent later on. Now the first Henry episode of this era is whatever, it's the next episode, Henry's Health and Safety, that really shows the true colors writers had for Henry. In this episode, Henry breaks the side rod by bumping into a truck, which is the dumbest shit as it is. But because of this, Henry becomes so worried about the next possible accident that he brings Rocky to move trucks and then Percy out of the way for health and safety. Like, what the fuck is wrong with this man? This is so dumb. This isn't the last time this happens in this season, as Henry is also worried about a box that it leads him to forget to talk to the other agents to come to Farm McColl's farm at tea time. This is something that wasn't really there much in the model series, aside from Henry at the beginning when he was in his old shape, so I don't know why this is here. In season 15, we get Henry's Happy Coal, which is all about Henry not taking his special coal, which is already stupid enough, but it shows that they still kept that dumb retcon that I hate so much. And then we have the season 16 episode, Ho Ho Snowman. Dear fucking god, this is possibly one of the worst episodes in the entire show, as the episode is all about Henry being afraid of a snowman, and I wish I wasn't making this shit up.
Hello, Henry! I have another joke for you. What does snowman eat for lunch?
Henry stuttered. Henry stammered.
I really don't know.
Ice burgers!
The snowman laughed. Henry wobbled.
Oh, me. Oh, my. This is very strange.
This episode shows us another thing about Henry that was never there before, which is that he is highly afraid, but I will get to that a little bit later in this section. After season 16, Andrew Brenner became head writer of the series, which led to season 17 through 21, the Renaissance period of the show, or the Brenner era. Season 17 and King of the Railway showed us that they were going out of their way to fix the series to be somewhat back to the way it was, like Thomas started to have stories centered around his branch line. But the biggest one that showed that we were really trying here was that they fixed the retcon of Henry needing special coal.
Henry's broken down.
Don't tell me he needs special coal again.
No, Gordon. That was fixed years ago.
I was like 9 when this movie came out, but I feel like longtime fans gave a sigh of relief when they saw this. Henry got one spotlight episode this season, which was Henry's Hero, and it is easily one of the best episodes of this era. In this episode, Henry and Hero take on some bad coal. While Hero wants to continue on with their job, Henry decides to wait for the new batch of fresh coal to come. Now on one hand, it makes sense for Henry to make this decision, since he has had a bad history with coal in the show. But on the other hand, this just isn't the Henry we know, since he would be on Hero's side and continue on despite his condition. But I could forgive it here, as it leads to the ending of the episode, where Henry, while taking on bad coal with a long line of heavy steel beams and a broken down Hero on a hill, pushes the cars and Hero up the hill. And even as a kid, I was impressed with this scene, because this right here is the Henry we know and love. But then we get to season 18, where we get a Henry spotlight episode that shows the true nature of Henry in this era of the show, which is that he is easily frightened.
That's not a cow in a field, and it's not the god's whistle. It must be the flatbeds of fear.
This is not a one-time fluke, as this then leads us into 2015 with The Adventure Begins and season 19. Kill me. In The Adventure Begins, we get their interpretation of the sad story of Henry. In this interpretation, Henry hides in the tunnel, not because he doesn't want to get his paint wet in the rain, but because he is literally afraid of the rain, which he never really got over to begin with, as later on in the film. Thomas has to help him get used to the rain, which feels rather forced in my opinion. This scene is also a retcon, as in Blue Mountain Mystery, Henry recounts the events for a bit in the film, and he says,
I refused to leave the tunnel because I didn't want to get my paint wet in the rain. Sir Topham Hatt was really cross. So cross, in fact, he walled me up in the tunnel. That was bad.
So that means that they came up with this to make it happen in The Adventure Begins. But then in season 19, both of his spotlight episodes show him being afraid. He is afraid of getting chickenpox and Henry spots trouble, and he is afraid of the abominable snowman in The Beast of Sodor, which is just so stupid. Also doesn't help that he screams all the time in this era of the show. Why this doesn't feel like Henry is that we have the previous versions of Henry. In the previous seasons and eras of the show, Henry was not someone who was easily scared. Haunted Henry starts with Henry not really paying much mind to Edward's tale, and then after seeing some things that he can't really explain, he then starts to get scared. But most of the time, he wasn't like this. So seeing Henry be boiled down to this makes no sense to me. It also makes no sense when you consider that Percy back then and somewhat in this era is the easily scared one, as he had many episodes that shows that he gets easily frightened. So to have two engines that are main characters that get easily scared just doesn't add up. Also, the backstory for Henry in this film makes no sense as well. So Henry first appeared on Sodor in his new shape, so by that logic, he had no steaming troubles like he did in the books or model run of the show. But he also went to crew, as they mention it, in Thomas and the Royal Engine.
I wonder where we are. Oh, perhaps this is Crew, where Henry went to be repaired.
So, by this logic, he had his accident with the flying kipper, but it probably wasn't as bad as it was portrayed in the books or model run of the show. But I think the most egregious thing about Henry in this run of the show is that this was really the only side of Henry that we have seen. With how much more there was to Henry in the model run of the show, I am shocked that they never really took advantage of that in the run of the show. We don't really get any stories surrounding Henry being a lover of the forest or him being a little grumpy every now and again. It was always about Henry being more of a scaredy engine. Something must have changed after season 19 because Henry got 2 lead roles in season 20 and they are both very different from what we expect from Henry in this run of the show. The first episode is Henry Gets the Express, where after Gordon isn't ready in time for the Express, Henry gets to pull it for the day and shows Gordon up, like he used to do in the Railway series and Battle Run after he got his new shape. Then in the other episode, Henry in the Dark, Henry gets the wrong pay at the steelworks and starts to glow in the dark, which is a nice turn on the typical Henry episode in this era, as he is the one who is scared, but the other engines instead, which has its own problems since Edward and Emily believe that there is a ghost on Sodor, but I like that Henry wasn't the way he typically was in this era. But sadly, this was the last Henry focused episode on the CGI run of the show, as Mattel and Ian McHugh had different plans. In 2017, Ian McHugh pitched the idea of Big World Big Adventures to Mattel, so that Thomas could continue and reinvent itself for a worldwide audience. One of the changes that was being implemented to the show for this reinvention was that they were cutting Edward and Henry out of the show to make way for the 2 new characters, Nia and Rebecca. This led to season 22, where Henry just out of nowhere said that he is moving out of Tinmouth Sheds.
And Sir Topham Hatt says I can stay in the sheds in Vickerstown from now on.
What?
However, this was never the plan, as confirmed by an email sent to a fan. Henry was never supposed to leave right away from the show. In an email from Ian McHugh that was sent to a fan, only Edward was supposed to leave Tinmouth Sheds. Henry was never meant to leave the show, but Mattel pushed it so that they could add another female character to the Steam team. So Henry left the Sheds and basically left the show after season 21, as he never really shows up in the show after season 21. He did get the occasional appearance, but he rarely if ever talked when he did appear on screen. So to go from season 20 with some strong Henry appearances, and then go to season 22 where he leaves the Sheds and then rarely if ever appears again is just really sad. If we did get the original plan for season 21, the whole Henry leaving the shed thing wouldn't be as rushed, but 2017 was not a nice year for Thomas overall. Henry in CGI is one of those characters that felt like the writers never really had any ideas for him. He is just a worried engine who gets scared very easily, with a few bright spots here and there. That, plus how they just push him off the show in the end, it really did give this vibe off pretty well. Though I will say this, he was not the worst handled main character in the CGI run of the show, but that's not saying much if you know who I'm talking about. And that was pretty much everything you needed to know about Henry and the show. Henry had a pretty interesting history overall in the franchise's run, going from another Gordon to someone who enjoys the calm peace of the forest, to Fred Figglehorn. While Henry isn't one of my personal favorite characters in the show, I can easily see why he would be a favorite for many people. One thing I can't deny about Henry is that he did leave lasting impacts in each era of the franchise, with the real-world connection in the Railway series, his new character personality in the model series, and being irrelevant at the end of its run in the CGI series. If I were to tell you what my favorite version of Henry is, it is easily the model series, as he had so much going on in those 12 seasons of the show's run, with his grumpy side, his nature-loving side, while also showing that he is both a badass, but also someone who is not perfect. I don't hate the Railway series version of Henry, but I feel he is similar to James in that he doesn't really impact the series as much as the other characters, and doesn't really stick out as his own character since he is basically another Gordon. And I basically hate Henry in CGI, but like I said, he is not the worst handled main character in the CGI run of the show. And that was Henry the Green Engine, a character that went through a lot, but is definitely the biggest tree in the forest.
Henry's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash, but Henry lay dazed and surprised. Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. "The signal was down, sir," said Henry. "Cheer up, Henry. It wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident. I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines. They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox. You'll feel a different engine, and you won't need special coal anymore. Won't that be nice?" "Yes, sir," said Henry, doubtfully. Henry liked being at Crewe, but was glad to come home. A crowd of people waited to see him arrive in his new shape. He looked so splendid and strong that they gave him 3 cheers. "Beep, beep," he whistled. "Thank you very much." I'm sorry to say that a lot of little children are often late for school because they wait to see Henry go by. They often see him pulling the express. He does it so well that Gordon is jealous. But that's another story.